Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Scott Schaefer. I am a director of engineering for Varonis, is a data security provider. I was also a customer for 10 years. I used to run governance, risk, and compliance for a global payments organization that was based out of the Northeast, but we had a lot of different locations around the world. And believe it or not, our payment systems run on files and unstructured data. It's still shocking to me that this is all how it works. But needless to say, I come with a different perspective only based on the context of having been on the other side of the fence for a very long time before really getting into the function of how do we control data in this world. I'm certainly very tired of getting the letters that is making the breaches that take place somewhat giving us all amnesia as we move on to the next. But we're also in a scenario right now, and as we've seen in every conference that's taking place, AI has been the most common talked about function. A year ago, nobody really knew what it was, right? I mean, AI, for all intents and purposes, has been around for about, I'd say 30 years or so. In 1985, if you do some deep investigation, you'll see some functions of that, and then we've got into machine learning and, of course, data scientists and everything else. But now we're in a scenario where we used to talk hypotheoretically, it's a new word for you, that what the risks could potentially be, but now we're seeing what they really are. So, one of the things that we're seeing in a lot of organizations that we speak to is that there is a push for AI. And that push for AI coming from the top down isn't necessarily about here's an outcome we want to achieve, here's an innovation gain, here is some possibility of getting productivity into a scenario that we can get more out of our people. It's we need AI because our competition is potentially using AI, and if they aren't getting on board with using AI, we're going to be left behind. There was a CTO, I'm going to not name the company, but he had a fantastic point when we were sitting in a boardroom one day, and he finally put his foot down and said, "We are innovating at the speed of crap." And that is extremely real. Now we're in a scenario, and I've been talking about AI for a couple of years and been on some of the tip of the spear function for it, but for all intents and purposes, when you really dig into it, now we're seeing, fortunately, we've got NIST has their framework, and we see government agencies getting involved, and we also have the context of steering committees and organizations now that have some insight into, if we're making this investment, what are we going to get out of it? And we also have to understand that AI as a product category has the expectation of income that is essentially what is the third largest GDP of the world. So this is not going away. So the things that we could do now are get ahead of it and understand exactly what the risk is, because we have to understand that now humans aren't one of the primary or only people that are generating data or using data. We also need to understand the context that there are bad actors that are logging into our platforms and we don't even know that they're there because they're compromising user accounts. There's not breaking in anymore. We don't have Neo, for those of you that recall the Matrix, having to do some wild bullet dodging maneuvers to get to a scenario to hack into a system. The reality is someone's giving this information up and they're logging in, and next thing you know, they're operating within your confines and your network without understanding what it is. And a lot of this comes from the function of just let's get products in, let's get some of these innovations, let's use AI. And what is it? So I want to talk to you today about 4 specific risks that we see today that actually have reality behind it. So this isn't a function of we're playing make-believe and what possibly could happen in this world of risk, of identifying impact and likelihood. What we're going to talk about are things that are very distinct and specific that have happened and have happened probably to a lot of the organizations that you're all in and how we operate today. So that being said, the prompt injection and jailbreaking, these are kind of two in the same, right? The AI functions are out there. They're going to put some safeguards around how you could utilize AI, but not necessarily really stop anything from taking place. If someone's smart enough to, ask their grandmother, AKA ChatGPT, how to create the atomic bomb because that's how you can fall asleep better at night. That actually is a case that took place, and it's kind of wild. It wouldn't tell you how to do it, but you could trick it to do this. So the position, when you start to think about how is AI going to consume data? Without data, AI is just a technology that has nothing, right? Whether it's no code, low code, or pro code, you have a scenario that it depends on data. Within this function that took place with EchoLeak, think about how email is a source of data. And for large measure, it is one of the largest data repositories in most organizations. So you have a lot of phishing attempts that come through, and we've got products that are out there that are doing their best effort. But a lot of times these low-laden URLs, or let's say that there's some level of people that were ahead of the game, and that period that looks normal to us all is a actual shape of a dot that has embedded language in it. So that if AI picks it up, it's going to trick that prompt to do something completely different than you anticipate it to do. And that's precisely what EchoLeak had. So now think about this beyond, and we can all look up EchoLeak and dive into it. I want to give a brief on that, but I want you to think about the context of what data is in your environment, how is AI going to be utilized, and are there any potential threats that sit within that deep history of data that's going to be leveraged by AI that is all of a sudden going to come back for a second wave attack? So if you didn't have AI before, you've got AI now. We need to understand what is the data that could potentially go into, especially when we think about the co-pilots and the chatbots and the ChatGPTs and the Geminis and Claudes and everything else that are out there. They have capabilities of being harvested based on a prompt that's coming in, coming back, and now all of a sudden someone's clicking on this link, or someone is getting this prompt injection and it's going to an HR site or something along those lines, and it looks like you're logging in to your own Microsoft 365 tenant, for instance, but it's not. This is just a way to harvest your credentials. And so we need to understand, how do we put some controls around this? And so the answers will be coming. Let's cover the risks first. Training data exposure. This is another one. The McHire, for any of the McDonald's lovers out there. Pretty wild for anyone that remembers too, the movie Spaceballs from the 80s, where Planet Druidia had all the air that they were going to suck out, and the password was 1 2 3 4 5. Well, McDonald's took it a step further, and it's 1 2 3 4 5 6. So they had training data that was tied to their employment system that essentially had overexposure. And that overexposure allowed someone to interact with it, and that someone that interacted with it wasn't the right person that it wanted to be. It was a bad actor. And what ended up taking place is the username and password were both 1 2 3 4 5 6. And this is a part of the training data that went into the LLM that then got exploited, and 64 million applicants ended up having their data put out in the wild. So, when we think about AI, and I always challenge people to think about what are we trying to get out of it, because I don't think that my social security number, or potentially my credit history, or maybe there's a case to say about some of the healthcare information if you're trying to find a better diagnosis, but does all data have to go into AI? And I'm going to tell you, no, it doesn't. Very likely it doesn't, but this is this idea still in year zero. Let's say year 0.5, because we're coming a little bit further now. But when it really comes down to it is, if we don't understand what the data that's going in, we don't understand the access that's behind the AI, and there's ways to have the APIs misconfigured that's going to expose data, it will expose data. And so we need to understand, what are we trying to feed into these systems to get something out of it that's going to be beneficial for us as an organization and as largely a human community. Let's take some of the lens out of these corporate structures and think about our data as citizens of this world that we need to protect, because there's going to be things like bias, and there's going to be decisions made about us, and there's going to be our information that could potentially be leaked in the wild. So we have to think a little bit bigger around, what does this all really mean? Sensitive data leakage is kind of part and parcel with that training data that came into play. But what we see in the world of Varonis, and what I saw even in my own organization when I was looking for a data security platform, was I had no idea what data I had. I kind of knew the region it was in. And it was great in the days before we had a lot of remote work and there was a data center and we had the perimeters and people had to actually walk into a building, but those days are long gone. So now we're in a scenario where this idea of our data is kind of here, and these people here have access to it, but I don't know what access they have, and I don't know if they really need that access or how they're using it. The primary position is when we get into the world of a Microsoft 365 or any collaborative data store. When I first started my career, we had filing cabinets that still had, 2 people that had a key that could get into some of this paper. Then we had a local LAN, and then we had file servers that you would have to go through a change control process that hopefully the data owner, but generally it's somebody's manager, that says, yes, this person can have access to this data. And now we're in a scenario where every single one of us in this room can open up our phone right now and share data with anybody else in this room. That's a control function that we need to be concerned about, only based on the fact that Everybody is trying to get something done. I've been in 3 different cities this week trying to get things done, and I'm working pretty quickly, and anything that's going in that path is going to have some mistakes in it. That's just the nature of human nature, right? So if we think about this context of data is accessible to all these people in an organization, we don't know what it is, but we find out that people are in control of sharing data with other people, well, we've got a problem. And so the country of Italy actually came in and said, based on the lack of data governance and understanding of access to data in our environments, we are not going to allow any organization to provide or upload any healthcare information that is accessible by AI until they can understand the control around it. So they're understanding risk. We're seeing these evolve. We're seeing this change. Now here's the biggest, hardest in certain cases area to fix. This is kind of like in the world of DLP, you still can't stop someone from grabbing their phone and taking a picture of a screen, right? These are things that we can't control, and some of this we can. But when we look at the function of shadow AI, and let's just get for definition's sake, if we think about unsanctioned, well, these are solutions that people are going to use, like the DeepSeek, right? So we've got net new tools that are available. We don't have the proxy set up, or we don't have pathways or CASBs or whatever the case may be that are aware of this type of interaction. And we also don't know what the documentation is around it. The security team isn't aware of it, and for anybody that's in the third-party risk management world, I'm sure that we can all attest to the fact that that's a pain in the rear end to find out about some organization that has your data that you didn't even have any idea of. But these aren't traditional organizations that are in a critical path. In the unmonitored side, too, is that we're still in that year 0.5. In a lot of the AI applications and LLMs that are being built and everything else in this world of great innovation, they don't always have the mechanisms to identify activity and identify access and do it so that there's a way to monitor it. And if we can't monitor it, we can't manage it. So, when we think about the context of this unsanctioned AI, there's a good and a bad. If you block it across the board, people are going to go to their cell phones, and we're never going to be in a scenario in this world that, like the bank cash rooms that everybody had to walk into. You drop your phone in a locker, all your stuff in a locker, so that you can't walk out with cash or anything that would be a secret. And in a lot of cases, what we're going to see is if we block this at an organizational level, people are going to go and use it on their cell phone anyway. They're going to use it on their personal computer. And now we have to understand, how is our data, specifically as an organization that we're trying to maintain and keep and put access controls around, how could that end up in this person's hands to be able to get to a cell phone and an upload or a browser extension, whatever the case may be. So DeepSeek was certainly one that rose to a lot of attention because of the amount of downloads that took place and the amount of people that were utilizing this. And of course, as we all know, where it resides, there were a number of countries that just completely banned it. Can't happen. And this is some of the elements that these are going to continue to pop up because it's very easy to create as organizations and net new organizations. Hey, we got this chatbot. Check this out. It's really cool. This is attractive. This is a marketing scheme to get people to try something different. I mean, there's something like over 150 chatbots that have some recognition. There's probably another 600 beyond that we just don't know yet. So the unsanctioned AI effect then becomes, we've got IP loss, big issue. We've got data subjects issues, or PII, that's getting lost in the wild. And then there was a conversation I was having with a group of folks that they were also saying the intellectual property, and when you have patents, you have to protect that in a way that nobody can get access to it. But now we have developers, especially in the world of software, where you can patent business logic, that are uploading their code into ChatGPT to make it better, comment it, do all the stuff that I hate to do, and all of a sudden now this is in the public realm. How do you protect something like that, especially when you're an organization that you want to protect your IP, and especially in the lens of source code or any other engineering designs and things like this? So we need to be aware of how can we put some controls around this and not just overly block it, because the culture of no hasn't really worked for the world of security. We still see breaches on the rise. Users are still going to be users. We have tools and all types of utilities that are available to us at all points in time, but it's the position of what can we do in a best effort to get through elements of having least privilege, having your CASBs, having DLP versus DLW, data loss watching, That's been a very common function of DLP and the failed programs that it comes out to. But we just need to have a lot of control because the user now is the perimeter. And we need to understand that. It's a very, very real thing. When we get into the case of unmonitored, so now we have Copilots. It's Microsoft. Yeah, okay. So they have the same type of scenario, right? User goes in, interacts with a prompt. That prompt is going to say, all right, this is what it made sense to me that I know that you want to have answered, so I'm going to go and identify everywhere you have access to data, and I'm going to give you the best answer. Now, the problem with that is how many people in this room are comfortable with the amount of access that any person in your organization has? Do they have the right amount of access? I've yet to meet somebody that's raised their hand, except for there was one guy a couple of years ago, or last year, that said, yeah, he's a company of one, so it makes perfect sense in that case, but that's not real. So the position there is that you need to understand how it's interacting. You also need to understand, are we getting good use out of it? And because there is a capability, even though it doesn't come natively out of Microsoft, tools such as Varonis have the ability to look at the prompt and the response. And so now we can understand, okay, how are people really using it? Do we have training opportunities that exist? Do we really see the gains that we're getting? Yeah, I'd say about 80% of people even today are still using the Copilots and the ChatGPTs like just an enhanced Google search. Or, let me find what's a quick way to put a meal on the table in 30 minutes or less, or please rewrite this email so it makes me sound smarter, or whatever the case may be, versus, really using it for the power that it does have. But at the end of the day, you still need to understand, regardless if it's Microsoft, regardless if it's a big name company, you still need to understand how it's being used in your organization because of the limitations around what it has natively. And so at this point, and we've seen this, every organization has had Copilot and Pilot for a very long time. And then there are organizations that open it up and they find out, we got to pull this back. So the position on this is that we need to have some level of understanding of how it's used. How do we get to a principle of least privilege, or at least a practical state of least privilege, because least privilege has been very heavy in academia, but implementation is very hard. And that's why you do need automation and tools and things like that to get you to a position to succeed. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about the same functions of there's data being exposed to people. I worked at an organization that we had a lot of code names. Anytime we were doing something major in the organization, here was a code name. We're trying to shrink the amount of people that know about it to control the hysteria that could potentially propel. And these code names, everybody knows what they are, but now they can go into Copilot and say, what is this code name? If you've got access, it's going to be out there. So we got to think about the passwords, the intellectual property, the sensitive data, clear text passwords that get into other systems and allow users or bad actors to move laterally. These are all capable and available to somebody if the access isn't right. So we need to monitor, we need to understand the integrations. How is that data being pushed and exposed to other users? We also need to get into the function of thinking about the event telemetry that comes from the human versus the human plus AI for threat detection and response. These are two different things, especially when you're looking at behavioral-based analytics. So, that being the case, what we want to talk about now is the element of how should we think about developing an actual strategy that's going to get us away from a lot of these risks, or at the very least, limit their impact or limit their likelihood from being exposed. So, depth and breadth become non-negotiable. And this is a key piece of not being a culture of no, which security has largely been, victim of, but what are we trying to achieve, why, and how, and what do we need to be able to achieve that safely and in the right way? Some organizations are very comfortable with dealing with risk because they need to get specific, resources that are coming in, or investors that will continue to invest, or whatever the case. And then some are very risk averse because they don't want to lose business, they don't want to lose customers, they don't want to have impact to their shareholders. But to get to that position, we need to understand, how are we going to see how people are using it? And what are we going to see from people, and how that data is going to come back? How are we going to see all of a sudden, John from accounting is now looking for HR data and is also looking for some other information. And now this, a disgruntled employee, for instance, is starting to pull a lot of information because they're going to make their next job a lot easier for themselves by copying a lot of what the organizations that they're working in are already doing. And we also need to consider all of the places that AI has access to. So if we try to limit it to just one spot, we've got a lot of blind spots. And so we need to understand where critical data is. And it's in a lot of places. It's in SaaS applications. It's in your massive object stores, getting into the world of snowflakes and Databricks that we're getting a lot of value out of to get a lot of data together and make sense of it. These are great repositories for AI, but there's a big unknown. And we need to understand where this data is at and where it came from and where it's going, because we can't ignore the function of third-party integrations. And these third parties are companies, and they're trying to do AI, and they're trying to use your data to better their systems as well. So these are the whole critical path end to end needs to be understood. Now, in a quick and dirty way, reduce your blast radius. Blast radius, the way that I like to describe it is you take any person out of their seat and you put a bad actor in there, they're already logged in. What could they do? Where are we comfortable with what they could do? Do we have the right controls, whether it's role-based access controls or we're being very distinct and specific around, just-in-time access or whatever the case may be. But when we get to a position of trying to take that tip of the iceberg out, right? We know that data is exposed, and within things like 365 or Box or Google, we can expose data publicly. This also exists in Salesforce. Shockingly, the amount of data that's held in a platform like Salesforce that's driving your data, it's more than a CRM. I mean, there is just so much intellectual property and the keys to the kingdom that sit in that. That's also a scenario that data can be shared publicly. I have yet to meet anyone that says, yeah, I'm comfortable with public sharing, I don't care what's out there and anybody can access it. That's great for marketing material, it's not great for your intellectual property. So we need to really get to a position of what that blast radius is, let's shrink it down. And then you take the next step, which is to lock down that data. Data powers AI, people are behind AI, the data that's going to come out, we need to make sure it's locked down, because AI is also going to allow users to create net new data at a breakneck speed. So we need to understand at that speed, a manual effort is not going to be something that you can really rely on, because it's going to work faster than any of us can. And we can't stop what we're doing on a day-to-day basis to get to the goal of what we're trying to achieve strategically or tactically for the business. So a framework to consider is if you can find your sensitive data, your regulated data, compliance data, intellectual property, high-value security data like clear text passwords, we can understand what's current, what's stale, just get a lot of mechanisms of intelligence around your data, and also aligned to all the identities and looking at how people are utilizing it. Now you've got a combination of ingredients that are going to allow you to fix it. And you need specific elements to fix, because if you don't know what data you have, if you don't know the identities that have access to that data, and you don't know how those identities are accessing that data, well, you have no real capability of fixing anything. And you also don't want to try to fix something because the days of unplugging a machine and saying, we'll wait for somebody to scream are long gone. Too many interconnectivities that are taking place that assure business critical processes can continue. We need to understand where that activity mechanism exists. And so by having that, you need to automate what you can. You need to automate cleanup. You need to automate reduction. And most of the privacy legislation that comes out there, one of the primary positions is minimize data. The less you have to control, the less you have to worry about. But this position comes into most organizations keep everything for eternity. And now throw AI on this and we're going to find some new innovation that's going to come from 30 years ago. Probably not, but it's there. So fixing your overexposures, fixing the stale data, fixing the just egregious risks that occur in the organization, but also you could be surgical around very distinct risk metrics or risk profiles around PHI if you're in healthcare, or PII if you're somewhere else, or intellectual property for most of us, but getting to a position of making sure that practical least privilege is in place. If you need access, you should have access. If you did have access, but you're not using that access in 2, 3, 4, 5 months, you be the determining factor on what that tolerance is, then remove it. Because I have probably 1,000 links that I haven't used after the first time I clicked on them, but now with AI, all of those could come back. And then we also need to understand the alerting the component of this. So all of the activity feeds, we understand what the data context is. And so if we can think about the position of a user is going to behave in a typical way as a human user, and now that human user has AI, that they're going to have a different profile. user behavioral-based analytics, we don't need another system that's going to give us alert fatigue or just another vulnerability management system and say, there's your million vulnerabilities, good luck. You need to have a scenario to identify and focus on the signal versus the noise, getting to a position of understanding how data is being used in your environment with or without AI, so you have a real chance on focusing on where threats could occur and how you can stop them. This exists in these capacities of understanding what are the prompts and the responses, the data that's coming out. Does this person that got that data, are they part of this overexposed group, or were they named access in their department? Understanding that interaction and being able to get to a position to say, we don't want people to ask their grandmother how to make an atomic bomb. So maybe we do some intent detection and stop those functions for you as an organization internally as well. We also need to alert on that risky behavior. This is the abnormal functions that occur when data ends up being, exposed, or just even if it's malfeasance or misfeasance, it's the exact same result. The number of times that you've accidentally went to move a folder over and then everything goes and you click cancel. That happens, but that also puts data in a potential location that could be overexposed to a bunch of different people. These are things that we just need to understand of, identify, mistake or real. If it's abnormal, let's take a look. Let's identify it and really investigate it. And if it's AI, we need to have that level of visibility into the telemetry that AI is providing us. So I'm going to build this out. A lot of what we've talked about today is really a position of these risks are real. They're going to become more real. We're going to see them at higher frequencies. And the position that exists is that you need to have a tool that's going to help you, a platform that's going to help you, a partner that's going to help you. You need to be able to identify your data end to end completely. There can't be a position. AI is not going to look at the most recent 3 years of data. It's going to look at everything. So we need to have some intelligence that's going to say, wherever your data is at, end to end, this is the data that exists. And this is also who and what has access to it and how they're using it and all these other telemetries that could come into play to give you a position on being able to do something about what you know now because it wasn't known before. So you could do things like a labeling strategy. Labels are wonderful to offload the possible issues of a DLP solution that's an enforcement mechanism to read context wrong. A label will say it's a one-step operation. It's either this or it's that, and if it's this, then do this. If it's that, do that. That's a very good, solid position. You could also label data to get it out of corpuses for AI. Remediate, cut that tip of the iceberg out, eliminate, identify that risk appetite, get everything out that's outside of that risk appetite, automate it, shrink it, and keep it into a position because people are going to continue to use data the way that they've always used data, and we want to make sure that that configuration creep always is maintained so that there's not going to be a next report or a next position. And at the end of the day, enable your downstream DLP, get your data owners involved, monitor user behavioral-based analytics, automate the access control, and continuously keep up with your data in a classification and context baseline, and you will have a good and great shot of getting to a position of success with AI. My time has come to an end, but like I said, I'm from Varonis. We have a booth upstairs, a few folks that are here ready to talk to you about it as well. Any questions around this space, we'd love to talk about data and protecting data. But thank you all very much for spending time with me today.